The day my father died, I promised myself I would be strong. I kept that promise through the funeral home arrangements, through the phone calls to distant relatives, through the neighbors dropping off food I couldn't eat. I kept it through the 2 days of sitting in the living room that still smelled like his aftershave, staring at a wall full of family photos where he was always smiling. I kept it until the morning Donna walked into that same living room, sat down across from me with a folder in her lap, and set a piece of paper on the coffee table between us. "I thought you should see this," she said. Her voice was calm, almost kind, the kind that comes right before something terrible. Picked up the paper. My eyes moved across the words slowly, then faster, then slower again, like my brain kept refusing to believe what I was reading. My name was in it. Just once. In a line that said I would receive $15,000 from my father's estate, described as a token of appreciation for recent care. The rest, the house, the properties, the savings, all went to Donna. I looked up at her. She was already looking at her phone. That was the moment my grief became something harder. That was the moment I decided to fight. My name is Audrey Pierce, and I grew up believing that doing the right thing always paid off in the end. I was 30 years old when my father got sick. I worked as a middle school art teacher in Houston, Texas, a job I loved more than I ever expected to. I had a small apartment with a leaky faucet I kept meaning to fix, a cat named Biscuit, and a savings account that barely covered 2 months of rent. I was not rich. I had never expected to be. My father, Frank Pierce, had built his money through decades of careful work in commercial construction. Nothing flashy, nothing inherited. He drove a pickup truck and packed his lunch in a cooler every morning. He raised me alone after my mom passed when I was 7. Just the two of us for most of my life. He came to every school play, every art show, every graduation. When he married Donna 6 years before he died, I tried to be happy for him. I told myself he deserved someone to come home to. I just never imagined that someone would one day try to take everything he had built and leave me with nothing but $15,000 and a vague thank you printed on cream cardstock. I was ordinary. My father was honest. And what happened to us was something that should never happen to anyone. Dad called me on a Wednesday in September, 2 years before he died. "Audrey," he said, "I need to tell you something and I need you to not panic." Panic. He had been diagnosed with esophageal cancer. Stage 2, which the doctor said was serious but still treatable if they moved quickly. He explained it with the same calm voice he used for anything difficult. The way he told me my mom had died, the way he explained why we had to sell our first house when I was 12. Like he was trying to keep me from drowning while he was the one going under. I drove 3 hours from Houston to his house in Millfield that same night. He was sitting on the back porch when I pulled up, drinking decaf coffee and watching the tree line like nothing had happened. "I'm going to be fine," he said. "I know," I said. We both pretended to believe it. Donna was inside on the phone. She waved at me through the kitchen window when I came in, a small, distracted wave, then turned back to her conversation. I remember thinking it was strange she wasn't outside sitting with him. I remember a lot of things now that I stored away quietly back then. 8 months before he died, I made the decision to move back to Millfield. It wasn't hard to decide, even though it cost me everything temporarily. I took unpaid leave from school, left Biscuit with my neighbor, packed 2 bags, and told myself I'd be back in Houston, Texas before summer. I slept in my old bedroom, which Donna had repainted gray and turned into a guest room. She'd taken down everything that had once been mine. The posters, the little wooden shelf I built in 7th grade, the mirror I'd had since I was 15, and replaced it all with a generic bedside lamp and a scented candle that made the room smell like a hotel. I said nothing about it. I was there for Dad, not the room. Dad needed a lot of help by then. Treatment had slowed the cancer but made him weak. He moved carefully like the floor might give way. He slept through afternoons. He lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. I drove him to every appointment. I cooked what his nutritionist recommended. I sat with him through old westerns he loved, even though I'd never liked them, because his time was running out and his preferences were the only ones that mattered. Donna was around but always on the edges of things. Another room. Phone call. Out with friends. I told myself I was imagining the distance. About 3 months into my stay, I started noticing things I couldn't explain away. Donna was careful. Never openly cold, never saying anything cruel. She started handling all the mail first. Bills, letters, packages. She sorted everything before anyone else saw it. When I asked what had come in, she said it was junk and changed the subject. She also started appearing at Dad's oncology appointments. Not everyone, but the ones where treatment decisions were discussed. She would hold his hand, ask the questions, steer the conversation, even when I was sitting right there in the same room. 2 months before he died, Dad had a good day. One of those unexpected golden days that sometimes happen near the end, where the person you love rises back to the surface and you almost believe, just for a few hours, that everything might be okay. He was up before me. When I came downstairs, he was in the kitchen making toast, something he hadn't managed on his own in weeks. He had the radio on. He was humming softly. We ate breakfast together, just the two of us. Donna was still asleep. He talked about the old house we'd lived in before Millfield. He talked about my mom, which he almost never did anymore. He said she would have been proud of me, and his eyes went soft in a way that made me stare out the window so he wouldn't see my face. Then he said something I didn't fully understand until much later. "Audrey," he said, "no matter what you hear after I'm gone, you know I took care of you. Right?" I told him of course I knew. I thought he meant emotionally, that he'd raised me well, given me a good life, loved me right. "I mean it in every way," he said quietly. He squeezed my hand. Then he changed the subject. I have thought about those exact words every single day since. The last 2 weeks were hard in a way I still don't have proper language for. Dad stopped getting out of bed. The doctors adjusted his medications again, this time adding something stronger for the pain. It made him sleep through most of the day. When he was awake, he was often confused. He called me by my mother's name. He asked about a construction project he'd wrapped up 15 years ago. A man came to the house during that period. I saw him from the upstairs hallway, middle-aged, carrying a briefcase, wearing a suit that was a little too shiny for a Thursday afternoon. He went into the living room and stayed for about 40 minutes. Donna did not mention him to me. When I asked who he was, she said he was an insurance agent handling some routine paperwork. I went back to Dad's room. He was asleep. I sat beside him, held his hand, and told him I loved him over and over, the way you do when you know you are running out of chances to say it out loud. He died 9 days later, on a quiet Thursday morning, with pale sunlight coming through the window and my hand still in his. I want to tell you what grief feels like from the inside, but I'm not sure I can describe it well enough. It is not what movies show you. There is no dramatic collapse. There is no single crack where the world breaks open. What there is, at least for me, was a strange, muffled silence that settled over everything, like someone had lowered a glass dome over my life and all the sound was now coming from very far away. I made phone calls. I answered questions from the hospice team. I signed papers. I accepted hugs from neighbors and nodded while people told me he was at peace. Donna moved through it all efficiently. She had already contacted a funeral home, one across town that I'd never heard of, not the place Dad had mentioned once, years ago, that he'd always liked. She had selected a casket. She showed me the options the way someone shows you paint samples. I said nothing. I told myself she was handling things so I wouldn't have to. The funeral was on a Friday. Small and quiet. Dad had never been one for large gatherings. His work friends came, some neighbors, and his brother Peter from Arizona, who cried so hard during the service that I ended up comforting him instead. I held myself together the entire day. I had become very good at that. At the reception after the funeral, I watched Donna work the room. She accepted condolences with a sad, graceful nod. She refreshed the food table. She thanked people for coming. She was doing everything right, and something about watching her perform it so perfectly made a cold, quiet feeling settle in my chest. Dad's brother Peter found me in the hallway at some point, away from the crowd. He was still red-eyed, still clutching a paper napkin like it was keeping him upright. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm okay," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then quietly he said, "Frank called me about 2 months ago. Said he was worried about some things. Said he'd taken steps to protect you, but that you might need to be strong when the time came." I stared at him. "He didn't tell me that." "He didn't want to scare you," Peter said. "But he wanted someone to know. He said his lawyer had everything in order." He paused. "His real lawyer." He stressed that. "The real one." I asked who that was. Peter didn't know. Dad hadn't given a name. Before I could ask anything else, Donna appeared in the hallway with a soft smile and a gentle hand on Peter's arm, guiding him back toward the gathering. I stood alone in that hallway for a long time after. 3 days later, after the funeral, Donna asked me to sit down. I found her at the kitchen table, hands folded, a folder in front of her. She had dressed up slightly. Nicer blouse than usual, small gold earrings. Like she had prepared for this moment the way someone prepares for a job interview. She slid the folder across to me. "I know the timing is hard," she said, "but the estate has to be settled, and I thought it was better if this came directly from me." Inside the folder was a document. Several pages, printed on thick cream paper, with a law firm's name across the top. Merit Legal Services. I read it slowly. It was labeled as a will. My father's name was on it. His signature sat at the bottom of the last page, dated 6 weeks before he died. The same week the man with a shiny suit had come to the house. According to this document, Donna received the family home, both rental properties, and nearly all of my father's investment accounts. I received $15,000, described as a token of appreciation. "He wanted to make sure I was secure," Donna said, in a voice so steady it sounded rehearsed. "He updated this when he knew time was short. I think he assumed you'd be fine with your teaching and all." I closed the folder. I looked at her hands, still folded neatly on the table. "Okay," I said. 'Cause I had nothing else yet. I drove to a parking lot 2 miles from the house and sat there for a full hour. I read the document 3 more times on my phone. I had photographed every page before walking out. My father's signature was at the bottom. It looked like his handwriting, but something about it was shaky. Uneven in a way his signature hadn't been in any document I'd ever seen before he got sick. 6 weeks before he died. He had been on a heavy medication regimen. I had seen him during those days. He had confused me with my mother. He had asked about a project he'd finished years ago. He had slept through most afternoons. Would he have been capable of reading a legal document clearly enough to choose freely what to sign? I thought about Peter's words at the funeral. His real lawyer. Those 2 words had been circling in my head for 3 days, and I still didn't know what they pointed to. I thought about what Dad himself had said on that kitchen morning over toast, while the radio played softly. "No matter what you hear after I'm gone, you know I took care of you. In every way." He had not been talking about raising me. He had been warning me about exactly this. I pulled out of the parking lot, drove back to that gray guest room, and made a list of every lawyer within 50 miles. Then I started calling one by one from the beginning of the list. I started searching for clues in the one place I could: my father's personal belongings. Donna had given me a small box of his things. His watch, some photographs, a few books he'd loved. Small items carefully chosen. Nothing that would help me understand his finances or his legal arrangements. I asked if I could look through his home office. Donna said she had already handled everything in there, that all relevant files had been passed to the estate attorney, meaning Merit Legal Services, the firm whose name was on the document she'd handed me. She said it pleasantly. She always did. I went through my box 3 times anyway. Inside one of the books, a worn novel Dad had reread every few years, I found a business card tucked into the back pages. The card was old. Its edges were soft from being handled many times. The name on it read, Harold Finch, Estate Law, Finch and Associates. Below that, a phone number with a Millfield area code. And below the phone number, in my father's handwriting, 4 words written in blue pen. He knows what matters. I sat very still for a long time, staring at those 4 words. Then I took the card to my room, closed the door behind me, and dialed the number on my phone. It rang 7 times and sent me to voicemail. I left a message, kept my voice steady. Then I waited. 2 weeks passed with no return call. Meanwhile, Donna had started asking when I planned to move out. She phrased it gently, of course. She mentioned she was thinking about some changes to the house, and that it would be easier to plan around a timeline. She smiled warmly when she said it. I started checking apartments online. No deposit money, but I told myself I'd find a way. I was losing hope in the slow, heavy kind of way. Not all at once, but rising like water until you realize it's already up to your chin. One afternoon I drove past the old building where I used to take Saturday art classes as a kid. I sat in the parking lot and thought about my father waiting outside for me every week, always with a juice box and a small snack tucked into his coat pocket. Every single Saturday for 3 years. He never missed one. He had never let me down in his life. I picked up my phone and dialed Harold Finch one final time. On the 4th ring, someone picked up. Harold Finch speaking. His voice was calm and deep, unhurried, like a man who had made peace with the pace of the world a long time ago. I said my name. I said I was Frank Pierce's daughter. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that felt like it held something inside it. "Audrey," he said, "I've been traveling out of the country. I only just learned about your father. I am very sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said. My voice cracked a little on the second word. Whatever Harold Finch had kept safe, Dad had trusted him with it for a reason. Tomorrow I was going to find out what that reason was. The waiting room had dark leather chairs, framed law certificates, and a receptionist named Willa who brought me coffee without asking whether I wanted it, which I found deeply comforting. Harold came out himself to greet me. He was in his mid-60s, with white hair and glasses hanging on a chain around his neck, and the deliberate movements of someone who had learned decades ago that slow and steady is not the same as weak. He shook my hand firmly and led me into his office, which smelled like old paper and lemonwood polish. Files were stacked everywhere, but organized. Everything labeled, everything with a purpose and a place. He sat behind his desk and studied me for a moment before he spoke. "I have been your father's attorney for 22 years, he said. "He first came to me when he purchased his second property. We updated his estate plan 3 times over the years, most recently 14 months ago, shortly after his diagnosis." He opened the top drawer of his desk and placed a folder carefully on the surface between us. "This," he said quietly, "is your father's will." I reached out and opened it with hands that weren't quite steady. The first thing I saw was my name. Not buried. Not limited to a single line. My name was woven through that document the way a thread belongs in fabric, because it did belong there. Because my father had put it there intentionally, carefully, with 22 years of legal guidance behind him. The family home went to me. Both rental properties went to me. His investment accounts were split. 60% to me, 40% to Donna as a spousal provision. Donna also received the joint checking account and all household contents she had brought into the marriage. It was fair. It was thoughtful. It looked exactly like my father. Generous with the people he cared about, careful not to leave anyone in desperate need, but absolutely clear about who his priority was. "This was signed 14 months ago," Harold said. "Long before any serious cognitive decline. I have 2 witnesses, both alive and both willing to testify. I have the notarized original. And I have a letter. A letter. Your father wrote it when we completed the will. He told me to open it only if there were disputes after his passing." Harold looked at me steadily. "There are clearly disputes." I looked at my name on the page again. Over and over. A promise my father had made in a quiet office while he still had time. "She knew this existed," I said. "Donna knew." "Almost certainly," said Harold. "Which is exactly why she moved so quickly." Harold explained everything carefully, without hurrying a single word. The man I had seen at the house 6 weeks before Dad died, middle-aged shiny suit, briefcase. His name was Craig Merritt. He operated a small firm called Merritt Legal Services out of a strip mall in a town about 30 minutes away. According to Harold, Merritt was known in certain legal circles for producing what some quietly called convenience documents, wills, amendments, property transfers, completed cheaply, completed fast, with minimal scrutiny and even fewer questions asked. Donna had found him. Donna had arranged the appointment. Donna had been the one to prepare my father for that visit during the stretch of days when his medications were at their strongest, when he was sleeping through mornings, calling me by my mother's name, asking about finished jobs like they were still waiting for him. Can any of that be proven? Yes. He folded his hands and looked at me across the desk. Undue influence does not require proof of someone physically forcing a man to sign, he said. It requires showing that conditions existed which overrode his free will. Your father's documented medical state during that period is a powerful foundation. I exhaled slowly, for what felt like the first time in weeks. Over the following days, Harold and I worked through the evidence piece by piece. The hospice records confirmed that during the week Craig Merritt had visited, my father was on the highest level of his pain management regimen. His doctors had increased the dosage because he'd had 2 difficult nights in a row. The combination of opioids and anti-anxiety medication had a documented effect on cognition, reduced ability to process complex information, impaired judgment, difficulty with sustained attention. A hospice nurse named Beverly agreed to provide a written statement. She explained that during that period, Dad had often been disoriented when she arrived for her shifts. She also mentioned that she had seen a visitor one afternoon, a man carrying a briefcase, and that afterward my father had seemed unsettled in a quiet way, which was unusual for him. Beverly's statement was one of the clearest pieces of the puzzle. The next piece came from my father himself. I had kept every text message he had ever sent me. Too sentimental to delete even the boring ones about grocery runs. Harold asked me to search for anything from the month before the Merritt document was dated. I found it on a Thursday evening at Harold's conference table. My hands were shaking all over again. The text had been sent at 6:47 in the morning, 48 hours before Craig Merritt walked into that living room. Indri, I need you to know something. I have worked my whole life to take care of you. Everything I've done with Harold is solid and right. If anyone tells you different after I'm gone, do not believe them. I love you more than anything in this world. Dad. I showed it to Harold. He read it twice. Then he looked up at me. He knew, I said. He knew something was being planned, Harold said carefully. He may not have known the exact details, but he was telling you, clearly and deliberately, where the truth lived. He texted me 2 days before she brought that man into the house. Harold nodded slowly. That message establishes that 48 hours before the Merritt document was signed, your father was thinking clearly enough to write a coherent, specific warning. And he was actively naming me and this office as the legitimate record. He added the message to a new folder, labeled it precisely, and placed it with a growing stack. Then he opened his desk drawer and set a sealed envelope on the table between us. Your father's letter, he said. In it, he names this office as his sole trusted legal counsel. He writes, in his own words, that any document not produced through Finch and Associates should be treated as suspect. Harold paused. He wrote it like a man who already knew what he might need to say. Donna hired a lawyer the day after Harold filed our challenge with the probate court. His name was Burke, tall, polished, wearing suits that announced money from across the room. He filed responses within days, moving quickly and confidently. He was skilled. I will not pretend otherwise. His argument had 3 parts. First, that the Merritt document was the most recent expression of my father's wishes and legally took priority over any earlier will. Second, that my father had been of sound mind when he signed it. He would call witnesses to confirm this. Third, that I had an obvious financial motive for the challenge, and that my claims about cognitive impairment were the grievances of a disappointed heir, not legitimate legal concerns. That third point stung. Not because it surprised me, Because I knew exactly how it would sound to a stranger who had never met my father, never seen what those final weeks looked like. Harold was unmoved by any of it. "Let him build his argument," Harold said calmly. "Our job is simply to tell the truth. The truth here is detailed, documented, and consistent." His case rests entirely on a document produced under suspicious conditions, signed by a heavily medicated man, at the arrangement of the only person who stood to benefit from it. He straightened the folders on his desk with quiet precision. "Your father didn't leave you a prayer," Harold said. "He left you a case." The probate hearing was held on a gray October morning, 4 months after Dad died. I wore my good navy blazer, the one I saved for parent-teacher conferences. Harold walked beside me up the courthouse steps without rushing, without performing, the same way he did everything. Burke sat across the room with Donna, who wore deep burgundy and looked composed. She glanced at me once when I entered. Her expression didn't shift at all. The judge was a woman named Judge Whitfield, steady, careful, with reading glasses and an unhurried manner that reminded me, just slightly, of Harold. She reviewed every submission thoroughly before the hearing began. Burke went first. He presented the merit document. He called a witness, a neighbor of ours named Carol, who testified that she had visited my father around the time of the signing and found him friendly and alert. He argued that my challenge came from financial disappointment, not legitimate concern, and that the amended will reflected a husband's right to provide for his wife. It was polished. It was confident. Then Harold stood. He did not rush. He did not perform. He simply began laying things onto the record, one piece at a time, the way a builder lays bricks. Not for show but because the wall needs to stand when the wind comes. He began with the medical records. The room grew very quiet. The medical records were the foundation of everything. Harold called my father's oncologist, Dr. Abrams, who testified with calm, clinical precision. She explained the specific combination of medications my father had been prescribed during the week of the merit signing. She described the documented effects of those medications at that dosage on a patient's cognitive ability, reduced capacity to process complex information, impaired independent judgment, difficulty sustaining focus on detailed material. She stated, clearly and without hesitation, that in her professional opinion a patient at that level of the regimen would have had significantly diminished ability to understand and freely evaluate a legal document. Burke objected 3 times during her testimony. Judge Whitfield overruled him twice. Harold then presented Beverly's statement, the hospice nurse who had seen the man with the briefcase and noted my father's quiet distress. In the hours afterward, then came the text message. Harold read it aloud, in full, including the exact timestamp. The courtroom was completely still. Then the letter. My father's own words, written in advance, anticipating this exact moment. Harold read the key line slowly. If any document surfaces that was not produced through Harold Finch, it is not my will. It is not my wish. It is not me. Then the original will. 14 months old, notarized, witnessed, my name threaded through it exactly as it should be. Harold sat down. Judge Whitfield looked at the documents spread before her for a long, quiet moment. She did not look up at anyone. Judge Whitfield issued her written ruling 3 weeks after the hearing. It was detailed and precise, the kind of document that leaves no comfortable room for argument. She noted that the merit document had been produced under conditions that raised serious and documented concerns. The timing placed it during my father's most severe period of cognitive impairment. The sole beneficiary had arranged the appointment with the drafting attorney. The drafting attorney had a professional history marked by prior complaints. She noted the text message as particularly significant. Direct evidence, time-stamped 48 hours before the merit signing, showing my father actively affirming confidence in his legitimate estate plan and expressing concern that his wishes might be overridden. She noted the letter my father had written to Harold, in which he had anticipated this exact scenario and left explicit instructions in his own words. She ruled that the merit document did not represent the free and independent will of Frank Pierce and could not be entered into probate. She ruled that the Finch document, The real will, the one Harold had kept safe for 14 months, was the valid and legal expression of my father's true wishes. Donna received her spousal provision, the joint account balance, and the household contents. It was fair. It was exactly what my father had always planned for her. The house, the rental properties, and the investment accounts came to me. Harold shook my hand on the courthouse steps. He didn't say much. He never did. "Your father was a thorough man," he said. "He really was," I said. I moved back into the house in November. Donna had packed and gone by then, efficiently as always, leaving the kitchen clean. She didn't say goodbye. I didn't expect her to. I stood in the living room for a long time that first evening, just breathing it in. Dad's coat was still on the hook by the front door. I hadn't had the heart to move it, and I decided I wasn't going to. Not yet. I found his coffee mug pushed to the back of the highest kitchen shelf, behind a row of guest mugs that had probably never been used by any guest. I brought it down, washed it carefully, and placed it back on the counter where he had always kept it. I returned to teaching in January. My students had made me a card while I was gone. My neighbor had kept biscuit fat and perfectly content. The leaky faucet in my old Houston apartment had been fixed by someone else entirely. Uncle Peter called me from Arizona every Sunday now. He cried a little the first time we talked after the ruling. I didn't. All my crying had already happened in quiet, private moments, in parking lots, in gray guest rooms, in courthouse hallways while I waited for news I was terrified to receive. I had learned something through all of it that I keep returning to, turning over in my hands like something precious. My father didn't fight from the grave. He planned from love, long before he needed to, with a clear head and a trusted friend and a deep understanding of the woman he had married too late in life. He knew his limitations. He knew hers. And so he did, quietly and patiently, what he had always done for me since I was 7 years old and the world cracked open the first time. He made sure I would be okay. He left me the house, the proof, and a lawyer who knew exactly what mattered. He left me everything,